What's up, you guys? Matt Moghaddam here, your truck editor at Driving Line, with another episode of Chasing Dust for you guys today. It's going to be kind of a short episode for you guys today. We're still under a lockdown, so I can't be going to any events. None of them are actually still running. All the events are canceled. So unfortunately, I can't bring you guys some stellar content. I'm going to go over some of the new changes and developments that are currently underway for my 91 Toyota pickup truck, aka Scarlett, as you guys have seen. The last time I did a video on Scarlett was when I was telling you guys about my plans. That was last summer. I was planning on doing an engine swap and front and rear suspension on there. Had a bit of a change of heart. So today I'm going to go over one of the main components of this new refresh to this build that I'm going to be doing, and that's going to be the engine, and what I'm going to be doing to replace the engine that's currently in there, and which engine's going in it and what my plans are for it. So stick around and we're going to go over that here in just a moment. All right, so once again, we are out here in my shop, my backyard here in Southern California. It is actually a beautiful day outside. I don't know if you guys can see. We got blue sky and clouds and fresh air. One of the unintended consequences of this whole lockdown thing and everybody working from home is no one's commuting anymore, really, except for those essential workers. And the air quality has improved dramatically here in Southern California. It's usually pretty smoggy and gloomy here, but it has just been beautiful. We've had some rain the last couple of days, so enough about the weather, but it's just I'm really enjoying this nice sunshine that I get right now because it's been raining the last couple of days. Anyway, I'm here in the backyard, and as you can see right behind me over here, there's an engine on an engine stand, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what that engine is, what I'm going to be doing to it before it goes in the truck, and what it's going to take to actually put it in the vehicle, and then talk about some power adders that I'm going to be doing with this motor to get a couple more ponies under my Toyota, because if you guys have ever seen this thing out in the dirt before, it looks pretty good, but man, is it slow. So having a faster engine, a little bit more power under the right foot is definitely going to be a big improvement for this truck. Last time we talked about Scarlett, I believe it was back in July of last year in the summertime. I had planned to do an LS swap, and that was going to be about a 5.3 or 6 liter engine out of a truck, so an iron block, and that alone, you know, requires a lot more things to be changed on the truck. It requires a new rear end because the Toyota 8-inch rear end is not going to be able to hold up to that kind of power. So I was going to be doing a 9-inch rear end that was going to require me to do a different rear suspension so they could keep up with the amount of power, and that would be a 4-link suspension that I was planning on doing with coilovers and bypasses. And in order to have the front end of the truck keep up with the rear end, I wanted to change up the front end and get some more travel out of it while still retaining 4-wheel drive. So that's not a very easy thing to do on a Toyota, because they're limited to the CV axle angles that you get from the front differential. It currently has a long travel kit from Total Chaos on there that pulls about 12 to 13 inches of suspension travel while retaining 4-wheel drive with extended axles. The shafts are actually out of a T100, so they're a little bit wider axle shafts, about 3¼ inch wider, longer shafts or wider suspension per side. And while it does really well with the current leaf sprung suspension and the V6s that go in these trucks, it does leave some room for improvement when it comes to adding horsepower and being able to go faster over big bumps, especially when doing a 4-link suspension in the rear, which can net you up to 30 inches of suspension travel if you do them right. I mean, I've seen link trucks pull 28, 26 inches of travel all day long. So having that much travel in the rear of a truck and having such, you know, a lower number in the front, being 12 to 13 inches, kind of messes with the dynamics of a truck as it goes over some, you know, bumpy terrain. I'm talking about like whoop sections and stuff while you're off-roading. So that's mostly stuff for the desert, which is mostly what I do because we live here in Southern California, and this is primarily a desert built truck. So I was going to be doing a twin traction beam swap on the front end of this truck. Basically, the easiest way of doing that, which is not easy at all, is to graft a front end of an F-150 or a Bronco from the 90s, the 80s and 90s that had the twin traction beam, independent four-wheel drive suspension up front. And with that system, you can actually get about 18 or 19 inches of travel from the front end and retain four-wheel drive. So that sounded very appealing to me. I actually bought a donor vehicle to do the swap, to cut it in half and graft that frame onto the front of my Toyota, then drop the V8 in there, and then redo the entire suspension in the back. I literally had the plans, a lot of parts saved up, but after a couple of months of just not being able to work on the truck, just not having the time and the resources to do it, I began to really miss driving my Toyota. I was skipping out on all the desert trips. It was actually a lot harder on me than I thought it was going to be, not being able to go and hang out with my friends and have fun. And I started to really understand that I enjoy driving my truck more than I enjoy working on it. While I do love a wrench day, I love working on vehicles every chance that I get. Nothing beats being out there and having fun with your friends. Of course, you know, taking the trucks out, having a great weekend out in the desert or wherever, the mountains, you know, it doesn't matter where I'm going. It's just getting out there with the truck is why I got into this hobby to begin with. And I think I started to lose sight of that. And I'm happy to report that I've regained that sight. And I've changed my plans accordingly to get me out there quicker than if I were to do the LS swap and the linked rear suspension and the TTV swap. While a truck that has all those parts would undoubtedly be really badass, it's going to take me a couple of years to get it done. And I just do not see myself being out a truck for that long. So with all that said, I went out and I bought a motor. What I bought was a 3.4 liter V6 5VZ-FE that came out of a 1997 Toyota 4Runner. The truck that it came out of was actually a running vehicle that somebody on Instagram actually hit me up and said, hey, I got this truck. I'm going to be doing a V8 swap on it, and I'm going to be taking this motor out. It's currently running in the vehicle. I can send you videos of it. He sent me a ton of videos of it running around, driving, and said that he's going to pull the engine tomorrow, so the next day after he texted me. So of course I was interested, and the price was right, so he went ahead and pulled the motor, and I met him in Simi Valley up in north of LA, and I came home with it. So it's right there. I'm going to flip the camera around so you guys can see it a little bit better. And yeah, so I brought it home and started getting to work on it. All right, so as you guys can see, this is a 5VZ-FE 3.4 liter. It's a dual overhead cam 3.4 V6 that came originally in the 1995 to 2002 4Runner and the 1995 to 2004 Tacoma. This was a factory engine that came in those vehicles. It was basically the big brother of the V6 that's in that truck right now, the 3 liter 3VZE. They share a lot of the same structural components such as the block and things like that. They do have a bigger bore, so that's what gets you the extra displacement, 3.4 liters. And obviously the biggest difference is the dual overhead cam, 4 valve per cylinder heads versus the single overhead cam that comes in the 3 liter. So quite a bit of design change from Toyota with this engine. They made them much more reliable. You don't have the head gasket issues that you normally would have with the 3 liter. They're a very reliable engine, upwards of 300,000 miles. I've seen many of them go past that without any problems. And yeah, it's overall a great engine. But what makes it a very good candidate for this swap is that it actually is a direct bolt-in to that chassis and that transmission. So that makes things a whole lot easier. For those of you who aren't really familiar with the Toyota 3 liter to 3.4 swap, It doesn't require a whole lot of work in comparison to a lot of other engine swaps that you see out there. Like I said, the engine mounts bolt right up to it on the factory chassis on the pickup, so you can just drop the engine right onto the engine mounts and everything lines up perfectly. The R150 manual transmission that comes in this truck is a 5-speed, and the bell housing on that actually bolts up directly to this engine as well. The main things you have to change, there's a couple of them. So we'll start from basically the top. Would be the wiring harness. Obviously the wire harness and the ECU that you use from the 5VZ-FE does need to be adapted to fit the body harness on the Toyota pickup. And there's a ton of companies out there that sell like conversion harnesses, adapter harnesses. You could even go with a full standalone ECU with a standalone wiring harness, or you can pin it out yourself and literally just adapt the harness on your own, save a bit of coin, and just do it at home in the garage. It'll take you a little bit longer, but if you know how to do it, it's definitely a big money saver. So you can do the engine harness adapter on there, and then everything starts to talk to each other. All the parameters, all the sensors, everything is working. You get the speedometer, the tachometer, all the gauges, everything works. The next thing you have to change on this is the exhaust. So on the Toyota pickup, the transfer case is a passenger side drop, which means that the front drive shaft runs down the passenger side of the vehicle, and the front differential is actually offset to the passenger side of the vehicle. The factory exhaust on a 3VZe therefore runs down the driver's side because there's more room to run the exhaust down that way. It is completely reversed on the 3.4. So the Tacomas, first gen Tacomas and the third gen 4Runners that had this engine, the 3.4 liter originally, had a driver's side differential drop with a passenger side exhaust. So what people do is that they'll use the factory manifolds that come on this engine, and they'll just run a different crossover on the back. So I'm going to show you exactly what I mean right here. As you guys can see, the exhaust routing right now comes from the the driver's side bank, and it crosses over here and it falls into a collector from the other side, and it runs down the passenger side of the vehicle. With the 3VZe engine, it's reverse. This side comes down, meets up with the collector here, goes down the driver's side. So since we have to adapt this engine to fit the chassis, they sell a crossover pipe that is basically just the opposite, and it has a collector on the other side. So you can buy that, and then the exhaust is routed correctly for that chassis in that truck. Very, very simple, easy to do, costs a little bit of money. If you can weld and fabricate, you can probably make your own exhaust pipe to do that. Another key component to swapping this engine into your truck, your Toyota pickup, is the oil pan. So the oil pan on the Tacoma engine, the 3.4 that's in front of me here that we're going to be putting in, has a front sump pan on it. And the reason for that is because the Tacoma actually had a rear steer setup. So the steering rack and the tie rods were at the back of the front control arms, if that makes any sense. The spindles on the front suspension actually take the tie rods at the backside rather than the front, like you can see on most vehicles. The Toyota pickup has it on the front. Therefore, it has a rear sump pan, and it makes room for the front differential. So what you have to do is swap the pans. You just take the 3VZe oil pan, the 3-liter oil pan, you swap it onto this engine, and then you have a rear sump pan, so you have all the clearance you need for the front differential, and you can run your steering the same way that it comes on this truck. Very easy. So that's another thing we have to do. I do have to also relocate the dipstick to make that work with the rear sump. So another piece that we have to change to make this engine fit. So those are the three main components that you have to change on this engine in order to adapt it into that truck back there. However, there are a ton of small things you'll have to take care of as well. Not nearly, as time consuming or expensive as the three we just mentioned. So I'm not going to get into it. But one of the things that I wanted to do before I put this motor in is do a little bit of basic maintenance. And what I mean by that is on an engine like this that has a timing belt and not a timing chain, it's always a good idea once you have the engine out to take the timing cover off, inspect the belt and the tensioner pulley that comes on there, and a couple of the idler pulleys. Make sure that they're in good shape. Make sure the belt isn't frayed, isn't too old and cracked and dry. And then the water pump, which actually sits on the same serpentine belt on the timing belt, you can change the water pump out. So I took the timing cover off the other day, to inspect this stuff, and this is what it looks like. As you guys can see, the timing cover is off. This is normally covered up by a piece of plastic that fits right here, and you can see the 2 cam sprockets right here. There's lines on them here for the timing, so that when you do take the belt off, everything is lined up correctly when you have the top dead center on piston number 1. That way these lines will all be at the top of each, you know, sprocket, and you can make sure your timing is all correct with the crankshaft so you don't have any issues. After looking at this engine with the cover off, I could see that the water pump is actually pretty new. So it's an ASIN water pump, which is the factory component that comes on this vehicle, which is great because that means that whoever owned this engine and did the maintenance on it did not use aftermarket parts. They used factory equipment, which is this ASIN water pump right here. That's a lot of good news right there because it tells me that this motor was taken care of properly. The idler pulley right here, the tensioner pulley, also looks like it's got a pretty new pulley on it. So this one as well, this idler. So it looks like a lot of things have been done. Also, this thermostat is brand new on there too. So I'm not really worried about doing the timing belt on this engine because it looks like all this service was done recently, and this stuff can last about 100, 200, 150,000 miles. I think they say it's 120 when you want to change it, but you can push it to 150. So this looks much, much newer than that. I'm not really worried about doing the timing belt anymore. I'm just going to bolt that cover right back onto it, and it's good to go. So obviously I was really happy to see that that stuff was done. The maintenance was done correctly. They were using correct parts on it. All good news. I did go ahead and clean up this engine a lot. It looks a lot better than it did when I first got it. Basically just sprayed simple green on there for a couple of hours and just let it really soak into the metal. And then I went outside with a power washer and just hosed it all off and got it all cleaned up. So it looks a lot better than it did when I first got it. And that's always good for when you're working on stuff. You don't need to get your hands all grimy if you can avoid it. So always a good thing. I did get the wiring harness for this engine and the computer. However, this motor did come out of a 4-wheel drive truck, 4Runner, but it was an automatic. So the engine harness, the ECU harness, is going to have a pigtail on it that needs to go to that factory A340 automatic transmission, which of course my truck does not have. And what that means is that it will throw a check engine light. So I have a few ways of going around that. Been exploring some things, but I think that the final solution is going to be well, this isn't really a solution to fix that problem, but it does fix that problem by doing this. And what I'm talking about is more horsepower. You know, I was doing some thinking and some deep soul searching about, man, how can I get this truck to just really stand out and make a lot of power and just be a lot of fun, sound cool with a V6 in it. Since I'm not going to be doing a V8, you know, I just wanted to do the truck some justice and have some fun with it. So I started looking around and I found out that there's a company out there that actually sells a turbocharger kit for this motor, for the 3.4 liter. And I got really excited because I was like, oh my gosh, I've always only seen the supercharger kits that Magnuson makes, which they originally made for TRD. The TRD supercharger, very popular way to boost to this 3.4 liter. But now there's another option. There's a turbo kit from a company called CX Racing. And I'm sure some of you guys are probably groaning right now because when you hear CX Racing, you think cheap Chinese turbos from eBay. Well, they've done a lot of changes with their products lately, and what they do offer is just a hot side exhaust system with a manifold and the turbo mount with a wastegate and a downpipe. So, or a dump pipe, excuse me. It's pretty cool because you can buy that hot side system and then you can put your own turbo on it. So you don't have to use their turbo. You can go out and get a Garrett GT35 or whatever brand you like, you know, Borg Warner, Precision, whoever, and you can use a quality ball bearing turbo or whatever you want and run it on this exhaust system from CX Racing, and then you can do your tuning and all that stuff, and you know you have pretty good fitting parts and parts that are going to last you a long time and make good power. So expanding on that idea, I started looking at what is it going to take to actually put a turbo on this engine. It turns out there's a couple of guys out there who have already done it. So I started doing a little bit more research with their builds and seeing how they did it, how they routed things, what kind of tuning software did they use? Did they use the factory ECU? Do they do a piggyback? Do they go with a standalone? Because Toyota's ECUs are notorious for being locked from the factory and nobody has any access into them to tune things. So you're kind of stuck when it comes to the factory ECU. The only thing you can really do to help yourself out if you're going to be running the factory ECU on this engine with boost is to put a 7th injector on it somewhere in the intake manifold so that you can get a little bit more fuel and you can make up for that extra air that you're going to be putting into the engine, aka the forced induction from the turbo. You want to make sure that your air to fuel ratios are correct. So by offsetting the extra air coming in from the turbo, you add a 7th injector to get more fuel. That works up to a certain PSI. It's usually around 8 or 9 pounds is where you max out on the amount of fuel you can actually deliver with the 7th injector. So with all that said, I looked into doing something like an AEM fuel injection controller, an FIC6. Which is a controller that you can use as a piggyback onto your factory ECU with an adapter plug. And what that will let you do is actually go in there and tune the AEM to give more fuel to the injectors. You can change the injectors out, and it will actually talk to all the different sensors that you can use on this engine to get it to run properly with the turbocharger. I know this sounds like a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, and I'm sorry if you guys are having a hard time keeping along, but we'll get through it really quick. As soon as I figure out which computer I can use, whether it's going to be a standalone or a piggyback ECU on the Toyota factory ECU, then we can start to actually buy the parts, put everything together, and start putting this turbo on there. I do want to get the engine fitted in the truck just to make sure that physically everything is lining up in there and make sure that it runs. So I know it runs because I saw it come out of a car that was running, but see if we can get it in there and running in a Toyota pickup, and then figure out where we need to do any clearancing for the exhaust to fit the turbo and stuff like that. So there's a whole lot of work that's going to go into making this engine run with the turbo in that truck, because that engine was not made for that truck and that engine was not made for a turbo. So it's a lot of figuring stuff out, but I'm really determined to make it work, because if I do, it's going to be the only, as far as I know, the only pre-runner Toyota pickup that's got a 5VZ swap that's turbocharged. I know there's a lot of street trucks out there that have that, Toyota pickup street trucks that have a turbocharger on a 3.4 liter, but I haven't seen any off-road desert trucks like that before. I've seen a couple of solid axle ones here and there, but never something like that that's made to go fast through the desert and has a turbo. So the thought of that alone really excited me, and that's why I'm going to pursue this. The swap itself, just to get this engine in that truck, could be done in a weekend, which is way easier than doing an LS swap and having to change the rear end and the transmission and the transfer case and yada yada, all the stuff you have to do to get an LS in there. All the factory components on this truck, the rear end, the transmission, the transfer case, all the drivetrain stays exactly the same. You can even leave the drive shafts the same length. You don't have to change anything on this engine. On this truck to make this engine work. So yeah, this is the way I'm going to go about it. Hopefully I can make somewhere around 300 horsepower, which is honestly a 220 horsepower increase over what it has currently with the 3 liter in there. I think it makes about 80 horsepower to the tires. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Anybody who's driven this truck will tell you the same thing. It is slow as molasses on a cold December day. It is horribly slow. So 300 horsepower to the tires on these 35s would be a huge improvement, especially with the 5-speed manual, because you can actually control it. You're not going through the torque converter, a lot less power loss through the drivetrain. So yeah, forgive me for being super excited about it. I just can't wait to get this stuff done. And I wanted to tell you guys about it and show you exactly what I'm doing, and hopefully you guys are excited about it too. So then what does that mean for the suspension stuff that I mentioned earlier? Do I need to change all that stuff now? No, because the 3.4 liter actually fits perfectly on the front end of that chassis, and 300 horsepower in a Toyota like this can still be ran pretty well on a leaf sprung truck. I am going to be changing around some of the suspension components that are currently on there. So I'm going to be doing a different leaf pack that is made for more of a racing application. So the F67 Deaver leaf packs that are on there right now are a spring under leaf pack that you have to actually cut the perches off the top of the axle, put the perches on the bottom so it's sprung under. It's already got all that done. It pulls about, I don't know, 15 inches of travel or so right now in the rear. And with the E30 pack, I should be able to get a better controlled rear suspension system with the set of bypass shocks on there rather than the smooth bodies that are on there right now from King. And I think that's going to work a lot better. Now in the front, it's pretty much dialed, but I do want to add a bypass shock to the front, which the Total Chaos suspension system that I have on there will accept. It actually has a tab on there for a bypass shock. So very cool. Thank you, Total Chaos. You guys are the best. They added a bypass tab on this. All I have to do is buy a 2.5 inch diameter triple bypass shock, 8 inches in stroke, and just bolt it into the control arm, the lower control arm that's already on the truck, and then actually just weld some tabs onto the shock tube that's already on there, and it's good to go. So very cool that that the truck can accept all that. And I think with the bypass shock up front, the different leaf pack in the rear with some better shocks, and just kind of moving some weight around, maybe doing a fuel cell in the back so that the weight is behind the rear axle as much as it can be. That's going to help the suspension work a lot better in the rear. And I don't know, all this is in theory, but I think that it's going to be a much better truck by the time all this is done. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot faster to do all this than it was to 4-link, do a TTB swap and an LS swap. So I know that I got your guys' hopes up with doing all that stuff, especially the LS people are like, yes, he's putting an LS in his truck, but sorry, it's not gonna happen. And for all you guys who are Toyota diehard fans who told me, why are you putting an LS truck in here, or why are you putting an LS inside your Toyota? Rejoice, because I'm putting a Toyota back in it. So hope you guys are happy about that. Now, obviously, I've got probably a couple more weeks, maybe a little more than that, of lockdown here. So I'm just sitting here collecting parts and just getting everything ready so that when I do have everything here and ready to go, I'm gonna yank this 3-liter out of this this Toyota right here and get to work on it. So for now, it's kind of a waiting game until I can get some parts delivered. Obviously, a lot of companies out there are working right now. Some of them are not in business, so I'm gonna have to wait till I can get those parts in here. And when I do, you know, it's gonna be game on. It's gonna be crunch time to pull that engine, get this one in there, and then start mocking up a turbo. And that about wraps things up for us today. I know it's kind of a short one, but you know, I'm just kind of talking theory right now about stuff, not really working on anything. So I apologize if it was a little bit boring and a lot of talking for you guys. I've been getting some comments from people saying, this is boring, blah, 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 blah. You know, can't always be doing epic stuff, especially in today's world where everyone's at home and a lot of people are out of work. So I'm blessed to still be working here for Driving Line as their truck editor. I'm still pumping out articles for you guys. We are doing a ton of video work for you guys out there to keep you guys entertained while you're at home. So please, please, please subscribe to our channel and make sure you guys see all those videos. We just dropped a really, really awesome on the trail video yesterday up on the 395, which we filmed a few months ago. And we have a lot more coming out just from our own editorial staff and the projects that we're working on. So please make sure you hit that bell icon also so you guys are notified as soon as a new video comes up. But for now, I'm gonna put this engine back inside the garage and keep waiting for more parts. I've ordered a few, I'm gonna order some more. And once everything starts rolling in here and the floodgates are open and we can head back outside, I will be making some more videos for you guys, hopefully with a truck that runs a whole lot faster. So I appreciate you guys following along. This is your truck editor at Driving Line, Matt Moghaddam, aka Desert Chief. I'll see you guys in the next one.